Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Pesachim Kaf Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Dan Ross in honor of the anniversary of his marriage to his chavruta for life, Rabbi Jade Sank Ross. You're my best friend, and I look forward to many more years of learning Torah together. And by Jenna Katz in honor of her sister and brother-in-law Andrea and Max on the birth of their first child, a beautiful baby girl. Mazel tov also to the grandparents Ben and Felice and great-grandma Esther. May she grow in Torah and mitzvot and be surrounded by all the love in the world. Mazel tov. We're going to now start with our daf. I want to just go back to the end of yesterday's daf because I didn't read it carefully enough. The way the back and forth went at the end of the Gemara, I kind of read it, but without that really there's characters talking here, and I want to read it again in a more accurate manner. So we started at the bottom of Kaf Gimel Amud Bet, about 12 lines from the bottom. There was a student who came and sat in front of Shmuel Bar Nachmani, and he started to say, in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, how do we know that all things that are forbidden in the Torah that are forbidden to eat are also forbidden to benefit from? Now, we already have answers. Remember Rabbi Avahu and Chizkiah. Chizkiah said, again, just to review, it's anytime it says lo ye'achel, that includes isur hana'ah. And Rabbi Avahu said, because it says by the nevela or possibly by the treifa, that you can give it to your dog or you can give it to the Gentile and the ger and the convert. So we learned from there that only those things can be given, but nothing else, meaning you can't benefit from anything else, other than the fact that over the last few pages, we found many exceptions to the rule. Okay, and that's why the Gemara says here, well, which ones really are we talking about? Because it's not really all Isurin Shabbatorah, because there's many exceptions to the rule. So which one are we learning about? What are you referring to? Chametz, Bepesach, B'Shor, and Iskal. Those were the two that we were left with. It says it's forbidden to eat, but it's also forbidden to benefit from. So he's going to have a different source. Okay, I'm already going to put up the sheet on the over here right now and just show you how this works. So what we have here is we're going to have a list of all sorts of suggestions about why this is forbidden. Okay, we're going to have Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani is going to suggest before he even gets to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and this is what I neglected to mention yesterday, before he even gets there, he starts to mention, oh, well, what about what we saw yesterday, right? What about lo yachel? What about nevela? What about la kelev tashlichunoto? Okay, and I'm not going to read those inside again, but basically, the Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, but what are you talking about? We could learn it from where Chizkiah learned it, or we could learn it from where Rabbi Avahu learned it. In every answer, the student says, no, lo yachel is isur achila, not isur hana'ah. Minevela, oh, he also like Rabbi Yehuda that we learned from the Nevela pasuk specifically. It's to the ger that you can give it to the ger as a gift. You can sell it to the Gentile if you want. But that verse was coming to teach you exactly what you're allowed to do with that, not in general. Or what about the verse about treifa? That you could claim that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi held chulin shenishchatu ba'azara or deoraita, and therefore it doesn't have anything to do with our topic. It doesn't teach you about things in general. So basically the student Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani interrupted the student to basically say, how are you getting to all these other things? Why are you saying there's some other reason? We already know the reason. To which the student basically rejected each one and said, no, you could say this and you could say that and you could say that, meaning you could reject all of those as possibilities. So now we're going to get to what does Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi say? And what we're going to have today, again, I want to go back to the sheet for one quick second and just show you that what you have here on the sheet is that we're going to have Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, but we're going to reject that also. We're going to say that's not a good proof. Then we're going to have Rabbi Yonatan, and we're going to reject him too. The first two are said by the student. The student says, oh, you don't like Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi? Fine. I'll tell you what Rabbi Yonatan says. Then Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani is going to reject that. Then we move away from the two of them, and the screen goes to Abaye and Rav Papa, and Abaye brings another reason, and we're going to reject that. Rav Papa doesn't like it. And then Rav Papa brings his own reason. Then we're going to have a question on it. And in the end, we're going to answer that. And we're going to be left with Rav Papa that we do have a third pasuk, and that's something else. Okay, I'm just going to answer how do chulin come to be slaughtered in the temple? As Art, you're asking, only hekdesh, that's the whole idea. That's the reason. Because you can't bring chulin into the azara. And that's why the pasuk is telling you, basar b'sadeh treifa, if there's basar that's outside in the field, And there, Rashi had said, we're talking actually about a fetus. When, remember, the baby puts its hand out, and it's something that's supposed to be in and ends up being out. You can't eat it, but you can benefit from it. That's to exclude chulin shenishchitu b'azara, something that's supposed to be outside, and you bring it inside. That's going to be forbidden, not only to eat, also to benefit from. And that's what that verse is coming to teach you, that chulin that are not allowed to be brought in, something that's not sacrificial, and you bring it in, you slaughter it in the temple, that's forbidden eat and forbidden to benefit from. Okay, so now let's go to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's proof. So we're starting now from 4 lines from the bottom. So minayin. So where do we get this from? According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, dichtiv. It says in the verse, kol chatat asher yuva midama. Okay, for this, it's very important to see all the psukim. I brought the psukim on the sheet, and I'll kind of put them up on the screen right now to help you. So if you look on the second, it was hard to how to organize the chart and the psukim. So the psukim come later in the middle of the second page of the sheet. So now we're on the second verse here. I did it out of order by accident, but Vayikra pasuk vav, parak vav, pasuk kaf gimel. It says, Kol chatat asher yuva midama el or moed lechaper b'kodesh lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. We're going to learn it from this verse. This chatat, this is a sin offering. Yesterday we talked, I think it was yesterday, there's sin offerings where the blood gets sprinkled on the outside altar. That means the altar in the Azara, the big one, where most of the sacrifices are done. Then there's also an inner altar, which is where the Mizbach HaKtoret is. Normally it was just incense, but some of the blood is sprinkled there too on certain sin offerings, certain chataot. But let's say we're talking here, the subject is a chatat that you're supposed to do outside in the Azara. If you bring the blood into the Ol Moed, which means into the Hechal area where the Mizbach HaKtoret is, the menorah, right, and the Shulchan where the bread is, if you bring it into that space, L'chaper b'kodesh, let's say you mess up and you think the blood's supposed to go on the inner altar. Lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. You basically disqualified your whole korban. So your sacrifice. So all the meat and everything has to be burned and you can't eat it. So now they're going to say, she'ein talmud lomar ba'esh tisaref. The words ba'esh tisaref are unnecessary, which we'll see why in a minute. Uma talmud lomar ba'esh tisaref. So if the words are unnecessary, now we get to a type of drasha, which is called an im eino inyan. Im eino inyan means if you don't need it for this, then we can learn from here to something else. Okay, that's a classic. It's a very strange drasha for us living in a regular world, but and you have to get it straight because we're going to do this a lot today, which is if words are unnecessary here, it must be we can take them totally out of context and put them somewhere else, right? You think about all they do nowadays is take people's words out of context and hold them up to them, right? Politicians, oh, look what they said. And they take it out of context and they say, oh, look, it's a horrible thing the person said. But if you see it in context, it means something different. But this is the idea. It's a very different idea here, but it's taking something out of context and saying, oh, it doesn't apply here. It must apply somewhere else. So what they're going to say is, Ba'esh Tisaref has no need here. Now, why doesn't it have any need? Before we get to the drasha, let's see why it doesn't have any purpose. Dichtiv, because now this is a strange limud, okay? But in Perek Yud of Sefer Vayikra, this is happening during the Yemei HaMiluim. Remember, there were the days where they sanctified the temple, okay? Not the temple, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And they did a whole bunch of korbanot. That's when Nadav and Abihu died. After Nadav and Abihu died, the 2 sons of Aaron, it says then this, all of a sudden there's this section which is very hard to understand. We're going to come across it a number of times in the Gemara because the Gemara is always grappling with what exactly happened there. We're only going to learn part of it today. So this Se'ir Chatat, I'm going to read from the Pasuk here. I have the sheet open. Ve'et Se'ir Chatat. So there was the Se'ir Chatat that they brought. There's debate about why exactly they were bringing a Se'ir Chatat. I'm not going to get into that now. Darash Moshe, but notice it's a Chatat, like our case. Darash Moshe. So Moshe tries to figure out what happened here. He looks for it. V'hine soraf, and he finds out that it was burned. Now, he thinks, right, by Yitzaf al Elazar va'ali Tamal, b'nei Aharon anotarim lemor, right, the two, right, you can imagine, after Nadav and Avihu bring this strange fire into the temple and into the tabernacle, and they get killed, you know, and you think Elazar and Itamar are good, but here Moshe gets upset at the 2 other sons of Aaron, and he says to them, what happened here? Okay, he says, so he looks for it, v'hine soraf, and it was burned. And then he says, the next verse is, Hein lo, I think I'm quoting it right, but I don't have it in front of me. But hein lo huva dama la kodesh pnima. I think he says something like, it's not like you brought the blood inside, and that would explain why you burnt it. And he's basically saying you should have eaten this, okay? And then he basically says, had it been that you had brought the blood inside where you were supposed to have it outside, then I would understand why you burnt it. So now the Gemara says, if that's the case, then why did it say it by us, by Eish Tisaref? You could already learn it. Now, why is it strange? Because this isn't a section of laws. This is a discussion between Moshe and the sons of Aaron. But what they're saying is, since there it becomes clear that the reason, okay, Moshe says to them, again, it's also based on interpretation there, but Moshe says, it's not like you brought the blood inside, and if you had, I'd understand why you burnt it. So from there, you can already derive it's supposed to be burnt, okay? Whereas he's telling them, but that didn't happen, and therefore, why did you burn it? Okay, again, we're not going to get into the end of the story, where basically Aaron says, no, what they did was right, and Moshe misunderstood, and it's very complicated, that whole thing. Not for our issue, because we'll never finish the daf, but now we're going to say, therefore, but Eish Tisaref in our verse is unnecessary, because you can already learn from that section and the discussion between them, that if you were to have brought the blood inside, it would have been the right thing to do to burn them. Again, it's not what they did, but Moshe says it would have been the right thing. And therefore, the words here by Eish Tisaref are extra. Therefore, here comes our Imeno and Yan. If they have no point being here, then Tineu and Yan lecholi surin shabatorah. Then let's pass them on to some other topic. What other topic? Oh, our two cases right now. Again, I wanted to go through, I didn't have a chance. I really wanted to make a chart of all the exceptions to the rule, right? We brought all these questions of Rabbi Aval and Chizkiah, and we basically, most of them we pigeonholed into saying, oh, even though there's this general rule about Isur Hana'ah, really we don't, okay? So any case, if you want to organize it, you can, but we're only left with Chametz, Pesach, and Shiur and Iskal that both have Isur Achila and Isur Hana'ah. So anytime we say Kol Isurin Shabbatorah, we're referring to those. That's what we saw a few lines ago. So now, Imeno Inyan La'achila, now theoretically, we could say, V'hinei Ba'esh Tisaref could be teaching you maybe you can't eat them, but not necessarily that you can't benefit from them. Now this is a little odd because you would think Ba'esh Tisaref does show you Isur Hana'ah, and maybe this language is just borrowed from the upcoming ones, okay? Because we're going to see in the upcoming ones, they're going to take it from Lo Ye'achel, where it's really talking about food. This seems a little unnecessary, this line, Imeno Inyan La'achila, Tunei Inyan L'Isur Hana'ah, okay? But if you're going to apply it to Chametz B'Pesach and Shiur and Iskal, remember Shiur and Iskal is an ox that killed somebody, and then the Shiur is supposed to be stoned, and you cannot benefit from it, besides that you can't eat it. So now, where do we get it from? We're going to get it from these words, Ba'esh Tisaref. We're going to take them from that section about the sin offering. We're going to apply them. Since they don't belong there, we're going to apply them to our situation, to Chametz B'Pesach and Shiur and Iskal. If you're going to say maybe food, no, it's obviously also Hana'ah, because there it already says you can't eat them in both cases. So you don't need a verse to teach you can't eat. It must be, therefore you can't benefit. But now they ask a final question, and this is the question that's going to basically, or the answer to this question is going to basically cause us to knock out Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's approach. Is that to tell you then, Chametz and Shiur and Iskal, that if you leave them, and that's that once, since they're forbidden to benefit from, you have to burn them? Amar Kra. So how are we going to learn that not all things have to be burned? Because we're learning it from the words Ba'esh Tisaref. That means it has to be burned. So you might think they have to be burned then, not just they're forbidden to benefit, they also have to be burnt. So they say, no, you don't have to learn that. Why not? Because in that verse it said, Ba'kodesh Ba'esh Tisaref. Okay, again, what was the pasuk? Any blood that came right into Ol Moed, lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. So it said lechaper b'kodesh. Right next to b'kodesh, it said lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. So what did they learn there? Only sanctified items get burned, but not non-sanctified items like chametz b'pesach and the Shiur HaNiskal. So therefore, we learn b'kodesh b'sreifa ve'ein kol isurin shebatorah b'sreifa. Okay, that's his drasha. So again, he takes it, but Eish Tisaref is unnecessary because it already in the story of Moshe and the sons of Aaron, it said Vihine Soraf, which indicates that would have to be burned. You don't need it there in the Chatat pasuk, therefore, and therefore we're going to jump it over to chametz bepesach and shor haniskal. But again, we're with this discussion between the student and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says, what are you talking about? You can't darshan that last part of the drasha because you think it comes to teach you that? We need those words for a different drasha. Now, when you need words for a different drasha, you can't darshan two things from the same words. So he says, what do we need it for? Ditanyas. It says in a Braita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Bakodesh ba'esh tisaref. Again, that's the words in our verse. Limed al chatat shesorfinota bakodesh. Bakodesh doesn't mean sanctified items like we thought. Bakodesh is used to teach you in the kodesh, meaning in the azara. Okay, they have to be burnt in the azara. You might have thought once they're disqualified, I could take them out of the temple and I could burn them somewhere else. Comes the pasuk to say Bakodesh ba'esh tisaref. They get burnt in the sanctuary, not the sanctuary, in the azara area, right? The court, that area where they slaughter the animals, where the big mizbeach is, where the big altar is. That's where you burn. Ve'enli ela zo bilvad, psulei kodshe kodshim ve'imurei kodshim kalam minayin. So now I understand from this verse, so a sin offering that you brought the blood inside, and now you have the rest of the animal. You have to burn it. Where do you burn it? In the azara. What about other kodshe kodshim, which are things that go entirely to God, or kodshim kalim, where the owners get to eat it? What about those? Okay, what about psule kodshe kodshim, or the imurim of kodshim kalim? Imurim, we're not talking about the meat of, let's say, a korban shlamim. That's a peace offering. That's one that the owner eats the meat. However, there's certain parts which are called the imurim, which are burned on the altar. So if those imurim get disqualified, then they get burnt. And where do they get burnt? In the azara also. How do we learn this? Minayin Talmud Lomar v'chol kodesh ba'esh tisaref. Okay, the beginning of that verse says v'chol chatat asher yuva midamal o moed lechaper b'kodesh. So from there you see all comes to include not all sin offerings like the pshat sounds like the simple reading of the verse, but all comes to include other things as well. Okay, which means any other items that get disqualified, if they're kodshe kodshim, things that are supposed to be burned on the altar, or the imurim of the kodshim kalim, the other parts are supposed to be burned. If they become disqualified, then they also get burned in the azara. Okay, so basically he says your drasha doesn't hold because the end of your drasha that you said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is rejected because we need those words for something else. So comes the student and he says, Amrle, Rabbi Yonatan Rabach mehai krak amrla. Says, you don't believe me? Well, I'll quote you something from Rabbi Yonatan, your rabbi. Okay, you don't like what I'm saying? I'll show you what your rabbi himself said. What did he say? Im yivater mi basar hamiluim. Okay, I'll open again the verses here, the psukim. Okay, now we are on. Okay, Shmot Kaftet Pasuk Lamedaled, when they're given the commandments for the days of the Miluim that we were discussing before, what you're supposed to do, and it says there, Im yivater, this is what we call notar. If you leave over meat from the basar miluim beyond the time that you're allowed to eat it, umin alechem ad boker, or you leave from the bread until the morning. In other words, you have to eat it all. Remember, we learned there's certain things have to be eaten that day and that night, and that's it. So if you leave these over beyond that time, V'sarafta et hanotar ba'esh, you have to burn the extra part in fire. Lo ye'achel, you cannot eat it. Ki kodeshu. So now they say she'en Talmud lomar lo ye'achel. The words lo ye'achel don't need to be in that verse at all. Why? Uma Talmud lomar lo ye'achel. Why don't you need lo ye'achel? If it says ba'esh tisaref, you have to burn it. It's obvious that you can't eat it. Otherwise, why would you be burning it? So what does the lo yachel in that verse come for? You don't need it for notar. Now we're going to go, like I said, we're going to have the same structure for all of them. So if it doesn't belong in the notar verse, because it already says burn the extra in the fire. So let's jump it over to what we're looking for, right? It must now this next line is going to make more sense in this context, because now we're taking the words lo ye'achel and we're applying them to chametz bepesach and shor haniskal, in which case we're going to say, wait a minute, but you don't need lo ye'achel there. It already says it, right? That's why it's possible that when we saw it at the top of the daf, it was just added by accident, that line. You really didn't need it when we talked about bringing the fire pasuk over, because the fire pasuk seems to imply no benefit. Whereas here, it's the words lo yachel, you cannot eat. Well, it can't be that we're applying it to chametz and shor, hanitzkal, in terms of not eating, because it already says it, you can't eat in those verses. And therefore, tenei u'inyan le'isur hana'ah. So we're going to say it must be you can't benefit. Now they say, ima kam b'sreifa, av kol isurin shabbat Torah b'sreifa. So now we're going to ask the same question Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asked, which is, if so, it sounds like we're going to apply to chametz b'pesach and shor and iskal the fact you have to burn it, because we're taking it from notar, which had to be burned. Here they have a better answer. Amarcha v'sarafta et hanotar. You burn what is left over. Now, notice the word hey, the letter hey. Hey means the notar. The usually means just this and nothing else. So they're going to say notar b'sreifa ve'ein kol isurin shebatorah b'sreifa. Therefore, only notars burnt, nothing else. V'hai lo yochei. So that's basically his drasha. So now he says, you didn't like Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's, I'll bring you Rabbi Yonatan's. Rabbi Yonatan learns it from the notar verse, and there it says lo ya'achel, which isn't needed because it already says you have to burn it. Obviously, you can't eat it. Bring it over to chametz and shor and iskal. You don't need not eat, don't eat, so it must be don't benefit. Wait, you're taking the words lo yachel there. You're saying we're applying it to chametz b'pesach and shor and iskal, but hai mebaile, we need those words for a different drasha. Same thing we did before, except it's not from the end of what he said. It's from the beginning of what he said, the actual words of the drasha, not the words dealing with what about burning. Hai mebaile lecha de Rabbi Elazar. This is Rabbi Elazar the Tana. Okay, there's Rabbi Elazar Amora from Israel, and there's Rabbi Elazar the Tana. Tamar Rabbi Elazar, lo ye'achel ki kodeshu. Okay, that's the verse that we saw in Notal. He darshins kol shebekodesh pasul, ba katuv litain lo ta'aseh lechilato. Anything that was in the kodesh, meaning sacrificial meat that got messed up in any way. It could be tameh, it could be notal, it could be any sort of problem that happens to it in the temple, something that just gets sanctified, items disqualified. Ba katuv litain lo ta'aseh lechilato. The words lo yachel here are extra. What do we learn from them? Because it says lo yachel ki kodesh hu, we learn that it means anything that's kodesh that gets disqualified is going to be forbidden to eat. Once we say lo yachel applies to everything in the temple, then what Rashi says here, and I'm going to point out in another 3 minutes, Rashi's a little bit questionable. There's a problem with Rashi here, and I don't have a good answer, but I'll raise the question. Rashi here says, Rabbi Elazar, okay, it's right on the same line almost as the Gemara here. Litain lo ta'aseh, di'imi v'sarafta lo avayadina be'isur lav l'malkot. If it just said you have to burn, you wouldn't have known that you get lashes. This comes to teach you that you get lashes for anything that you eat that's disqualified. Like let's say the Kohen did pigul on the sacrifice and he messed up the sacrifice, and you eat it, you get lashes, okay? Or a tummy, you get lashes. I mean, those also have their own punishments, but any other kind of thing that you eat that's disqualified in the temple, you get lashes for. Okay, now we're going to have, you'll hold off on this because we're going to have a big question on this because we're going to say soon that that's not a lo taseh that you could get lashes for. So we'll get back to that. But right now, at least the way they're reading the Gemara now, that verse is needed to teach you there's a lo taseh for all other kodesh that gets disqualified. And therefore, you can't learn from here to chametz b'pesach and shor and iskal. So that one's rejected. So that finished our discussion basically between the student and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. Now comes in Abaye, but we're not finished with the section because as I told you, there's going to be 2 more attempts to prove a different way of learning Isur Hana'ah, forbidden to get benefit from chametz b'pesach and shor and iskal. Amar Abaye, Lo'olam mikra kama. He goes back to the original verse of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. What was that? Remember, that was with kol chatat, asher yuvam midamai, any sin offering that you bring the dam into the Ol Moed, l'chaper b'kodesh. It said, lo te'achel ba'esh tisaref. Now, we tried to darshan it, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, from the words ba'esh tisaref, because you don't need them, because it already said it by Moshe Rabbeinu. But he says, v'ipuch. He learns it from a different part, not from the ba'esh tisaref, but from which part? The lo te'achel. Just like we did a minute ago with Rabbi Yonatan, we could say the same thing. You don't need the words lo te'achel if it already says ba'esh tisaref. If you have to burn it, obviously you can't eat it. So delichtov ba'esh tisaref, it should have just said, it has to be burned. V'lo bai lo ta'achel, and you didn't need to say, don't eat it. So ma tamalom lo ta'achel, now you know where this is going already. Imeno inyan ligufo, if it's not necessary there, dinafka lemi de Rabbi Elazar, because we already learned, now he's going to also point out, we already learned lo ta'achel from Rabbi Elazar, that it's forbidden to eat. Because remember, we learned, Rabbi Elazar said, anytime you have kodesh that gets disqualified, here would be a great case. The chatat, you brought the blood inside where you weren't allowed to, it became disqualified, you can't eat it. So we already learned from Rabbi Elazar, okay, it's not actually what, right? You could have said, if you didn't need lo te'achel, and you certainly don't need the lo te'achel. You might have thought lo te'achel maybe it's coming to teach you. You get lashes for it, but we already learned that from the other verse by notav. And therefore, Tanei Winyan l'chol isurin shebatorah. So let's take these words, lo te'achel, let's apply it to chametz and shor niskal. Ve'im eno winyan la'achila. Now, even though it says lo te'achel, we don't need to learn lo te'achel because it already says it in the verse. Tanei Winyan l'isur hana'ah. Right now, again, ima kam b'streifa, but then it would sound like you have to burn those things. Af kol isurin shebatorah b'streifa, right? Just like here, it says ba'esh tisaref, by the sin offering. So therefore, you might think also there. Amarkra hanotar. So now we go back to the notar verse and we say, oh, in the notar verse, it says you burn notar. That seems to imply hanotar b'schleifa ve'ein kol isurin shebatorah b'schleifa. Okay, that sounds like a good drasha. But Amalei Rav Papa Labai says, no. Maybe you need the lo te'achel there by the chatat to teach you that you get lashes for it. Now, didn't we just say you learn it from notar that you get lashes? So they're going to say, Di'imi de Rabbi Elazar, ein lokin alav shebechlalot. What is a lav shebechlalot? A lav shebechlalot is a lav that has a lot of lo ta'aseh, a lot of things in that one lo ta'aseh. We have one lo ta'aseh, it says, don't eat the notar, which we now say applies not only to notar, it applies to any disqualified kodesh, sanctified item that becomes disqualified in the temple. Therefore, we're going to say that one lo ta'aseh includes many things, right? It includes the chatat that you brought outside. It includes pigul. It includes tameh. It includes all sorts of things that got messed up in the temple. That's called one lav with a lot of, right? A lot of different things about it, a lot of different isurim, things that you would get lashes on. And there's a rule that you don't get lashes on a lav shebechlalot. Okay, this is why I said Rashi, when Rashi says it earlier, it's as if you could. That's why Rashi is a little questionable. Now, it could be, they assume the Gemara at that point thinks you can. And here the Gemara, right, Rashi often explains things in their place and not necessarily that they fit in with other things. So it could be that Rashi was just explaining. In their place, the Gemara thinks that it's there to say you get lashes, but here the Gemara rejects it and says you don't get lashes for anything shebechlalot. Therefore, the lo te'achel by chatat actually needs to be there to teach you that you get lashes. If the blood you brought the blood inside where you weren't allowed to, and then you ate the meat, you would get lashes. And you wouldn't know that from notar because it's a lav shebechlalot. You might know it's forbidden, but you wouldn't get lashes from it. Therefore, we need it here, and therefore we can't learn from it to chametz. And therefore, Ela Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa now brings his own reason. Mehacha habasar asher yiga bechol tamei lo ye'achel ba'esh yisaref. Okay, I'm going to bring this up again on the screen. It's just helpful to see all the verses. So now we're back to this verse on, we're at the last verse here in the verses that I brought, Vayikra Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Tet. It's actually Pasuk Yud Tet and Kaf. Habasar asher yiga, meat that touches bechol tamei, meaning you have sacrificial meat and it became impure. Lo yachel ba'esh yisaref. Okay, it can't be eaten, it has to be burned. Okay, we'll go back to this verse in a minute. She'ein tamud lomar lo yachel, ma tamud lomar lo yachel. Again, you don't need lo yachel if it already says ba'esh yisaref. Ma tamud lomar lo yachel, and also we had the verse by nota. But anyway, he's going to not say that. It's because it says ba'esh yisaref. Now he's going to say, sorry. He's going to say we learn it from a different place. We know that if basar becomes tamei, it's forbidden to eat. How do we know this? We're going to learn it from somewhere else because he doesn't want to learn it from notar because notar won't help us because we already said that's a lav shebechlalot and you wouldn't get lashes for it. So now he's going to say, but there's another reason why you wouldn't learn it because the hanafkale mikava chomer mi maaser hakal. What's maaser? Maaser sheni. This is the food you're supposed to bring to the temple. And it's definitely a weaker level of sanctity. First of all, you only have to eat it in Jerusalem. You don't have to actually bring it to the temple. I said to the temple, but it's not really true. It's really to Jerusalem, and you eat it in Jerusalem. It's definitely weaker in terms of Kedusha than meat, that sacrificial meat. And yet, what do we know about Maaser? Ma Maaser Hakal Amra Torah Lo Bi'arti Mimenu B'tamei. What is this line? This is in what we call Vidoy Ma'asrot. This is something you do at the end of the 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle and the end of the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle. Right? There's a 7-year Shemitah cycle. So the end of the 3rd and the end of the 6th, you take out, you destroy all the maaser you have in your house. You say, you do a vidoy ma'asrot, and you say, you don't actually destroy. What do you do? Right. You have to get rid of when you redeemed it onto the coins, you have to say, basically, I took care of, you basically finished using it. And then you say, I took care of all my responsibilities. And it says here, and I didn't have to burn it because it was impure, which seems to imply if it were impure, I would have had to burn it, which means it's forbidden to eat. So now, if maaser, which is kal, and yet the Torah says lo bi'arti mimenu b'tamei, and somehow they understand from here, it's a good question, how exactly, that there's some sort of lo ta'aseh, that it's forbidden. Basar kodesh chamor lo kol shekain. So wouldn't we assume that sanctified meat all the more so? V'chi tema. Now you might say emas hirim min adin. Wait, this is from a kal v'chomer. Generally, when we learn something from a kal v'chomer, we can learn maybe that something's forbidden, but not that. First of all, you can't learn a punishment from it. And even they say in order to get punished for something, you need to have a lo ta'aseh associated with it. A negative has to say, don't do this. You can't derive that from a kal v'chomer. So here we're trying to derive it from maaser, but through a kal v'chomer, that wouldn't work. So I'll give you a better answer. So since you can't learn it from a kal v'chomer, because there's a hekesh. A hekesh is when two things are found in the same verse. We can learn from one to the other, and that you could learn a lo ta'aseh from one to the other. Where are they connected? Dichtiv. It says, Lo tuchal le'echol b'sha'arecha. You can't eat in your own home, right? These are things you have to bring to the temple. Ma'aser degancha tiroshcha v'yitzarecha u'bechorot b'karcha v'tzonecha. And then it says, and your nidarim and nidavot. If they forget to bring the important part of the verse, the nidarim and nidavot are the sacrifices you bring, the meat, right? The meat to the temple. And it says in the beginning, the ma'aser. So they say, oh, ma'aser is in the same verse as the sacrificial meat. Therefore, we're going to say we can learn from there if maaser is forbidden to eat, then also the sacrificial meat will be forbidden to eat, again, if it becomes impure. So therefore, they say, so again, we're going to take the lo te'achel that appears here, or is it lo ye'achel? Sorry, I keep getting confused because some are some and some of the other. Okay, it says ye'achel. So we're going to take the lo ye'achel from there. We're going to apply it to chametz and shor niskal, and we're going to say, wait, but it's lo ye'achel. We don't need isur achila. We already know that. So we're going to learn from here. Okay, this is going to be a total repeat. And then they're going to ask again our question we always ask. Well, then ima kam b'sreifa, because here it says you have to burn it. Av kol isurin shebatorah b'sreifa. So again, we're going to say, amar kra. So the pasuk says ha notar. Again, we're going to learn from the notar pasuk that only notar b'sreifa ve'ein kol isurin shebatorah b'sreifa. I want you to notice that there's something interesting here. All the verses we tried to derive it from were all sanctified items, right? That's why in the end, they always have to go to the streifa. It's interesting that they're trying to learn from sanctified items to non-sanctified items. Anyway, that's something to think about. Now we're going to have a question on this. I said Rav Papa his reason's going to stand, but they're going to first question it. Amarle Ravina the Ravashi, ve'ema lavor alav b'shnei lavim. Maybe you need the lo yachel here to teach you that if you eat meat that became tameh, sacrificial meat that became impure, and you eat it, you have one lo taseh because it says it in the verse there, lo yachel, and you have a second lo taseh because of the notar pasuk. By notar, it says, right? We said that lo yachel applies to all sanctified items that become disqualified. So maybe it's to teach you that you get 2 sets of lashes. How do we know that there's such a thing as 2 sets of lashes? We actually learned it in Eruvin, Daf Kavchet. Amar Abaye, achal putita lo ke'arba, nimala lo ke'chamesh, sir'a lo ke'shesh. Okay, a putita is a type of, they're not exactly sure what it is. It's a type of creature that it's in the water, maybe some sort of snail also. So putita, you're going to have, I made a chart. This is actually, I took the charts from Eruvin Kavchet, okay, that I made then. So putita, you get 4 sets of lashes because, okay, I'm not going to read all this inside, but you can see it on the chart. I put it up here. If you don't have it, you can open the sheet at home. There's 2 psukim by Shratzim, or it's actually 1 verse, but 2 sections where it says, don't do this, don't tishatzu et nafshatechem and lo titam'u. So everything's going to have those 2 basic sheretz ones. The putita is a water one that lives in the water. There's 2 verses by Yikra Yud Aleph and Dvarim Yud Daled Yud, where it talks about the sheretz in the water. So you're going to have 4 lotases. And the malah, which is on the ground, there's 3 verses about a sheretz haaretz, also all listed here. It's all in Vayikra Yud Aleph, psukim 41, 42, and 44, where it says don't eat these or don't do something, right? Don't impurify yourself by them. So there's 3 plus the 2 of the sheretz that are general. And then you have the tzirah, which has 6, because that also flies, and it's also on the ground, and it's also the regular. And there's another pasuk, which is in Dvarim Yud Daled Yud Tet, about ones that fly, okay? Kol sheretz ha'of. So basically, we're going to say, look, there's an example of, you could get a number of sets of lashes. So based on how many lotas as it says in the Torah. So you don't have to say this is extra and you don't need it because of the lotas and because you don't need another lotas. It already says it. Maybe it's coming to teach you. You get 2 sets of lashes, in which case you can't learn from there. I want to just point out as an aside, which is a very important aside, but it's something worth looking into. The Rambam has a different approach. He doesn't think there's such a thing of 2 sets of lashes for one act that you do. If you do, you eat a sheretz, right? 1 set of lashes. So he has to explain this whole sugya very much not the way it seems, because the way it looks, it seems very clear that you do. Okay, so I'll just put the Rambam aside. Someone, if you want, you can look into it. So now, here comes Rav Papa's answer. Amalei, it's a very interesting answer. Kol hecha di'ika lemidrash darshinan v'lo mukminan b'lava yetere. He says like this. When you can't find anything else to do with those verses, we assume it comes to add another set of lotases, and then you get another set of lashes, like by the sheretz pasuk. There's no reason why it needed to say kol sheretz lo tochlu and then lo titamu and all those other verses. There's nothing else you could do with those verses. You can't apply them to anywhere else. So if we have no choice, we're going to say, okay, you get multiple sets of lashes. But in our case, we have something to do with it. So if we have something else to do with it, better do something else with it than to say you get multiple sets of lashes. So that's his answer, and that's how Rav Papa's answer in the end stays. So we end up with basically 3 answers. Okay, we have Chizkiah, again, lo ye'achel, if it's written with that nikud, with the pronunciation, ye'achel, that includes hana'ah. We have Rabbi Yavau, unless it says you can benefit, we assume you can't. And then we have Rav Papa, who says we're going to learn it from the Tameh pasuk about basar tameh. If there's basar that becomes tameh, becomes impure, and you eat it, lo yechel, right? It's forbidden. You don't need the verse to tell you that, because we can learn it elsewhere. Therefore, we're going to apply that to chametz and shor haniskal. Now they're going to go more in depth into those verses about the tameh meat. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the verses for a minute again, and we're going to look at the tameh meat. So it says, Habasar asher yigal. First, let's read the 2 verses and then we'll darshan them. Meat that touches, or right, bechol tameh, meaning meat that becomes impure, lo yachel, cannot be eaten, but eish yisaref, it has to be burned by the fire. Then there's a very strange ending to this verse. Vahabasar kol tahor yochal basar. And the meat, anyone pure will eat basar. Okay, it's very hard to understand. We'll talk about it in a minute. The next pasuk goes into not that the meat was impure, but a person who's impure, who eats sacrificial meat, asher laHashem, that belonged to God, v'tumato alav, and you're tameh when you eat it. So notice, first of all, the first verse was about impure meat. If you eat impure meat, it's forbidden, but it doesn't say karet. But if you are impure and you eat sacrificial meat that's not impure, then you're going to get karet. Okay. Some people say abasar kol tahor yochal basar is coming to teach you that you're only obligated for impure meat that you could have, that was good, that wasn't disqualified for some other reason. And if it was disqualified for some other reason, then it's not kol tahor. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that. Okay, but now we're going to darshan a few things about these psukim. V'habasar asher yigal b'chol tameh lo yachel. Dereisha lamali. So they're basically asking, and there's a debate what they're asking about. Are they asking about the vav in v'habasar and the meat? Why did you need the vav? Or maybe the whole word basar is unnecessary. So what's it coming to teach you? L'rabot etzim u'levona, to teach you that Remember we learned this the other day? You have things that are called chibat hakodesh, the wood that you use to burn on the mizbeach, on the altar, and the livonah, the frankincense that they use. Those have sanctity to them, and even though they're not food, they also can become impure. V'habasar kol tahor yochal basar d'seif alamali. Why, if you notice, it says v'habasar asher yigan, and then it says v'habasar kol tahor. Why does it repeat the word v'habasar in the middle? Lerabot imurim, to teach you that it also applies to imurim. Okay, these are the things that get burnt on the altar. That imurim, if they get disqualified, then also if you eat them. Now, normally the imurim you don't eat at all. So this is to teach you that if you eat the imurim when they're disqualified, let's say they became tameh, you'd also be obligated. So now they say, wait a minute, imurim mehatam nafka. Wait, those are learned out from a different verse. That's the next verse that we saw, right? Then they say, what does it mean, asher lashem, that belong to God? Oh, lirabot imurim. That includes the parts of the animal that get burned on the altar that are for God. So therefore it comes, already taught you in that pasuk. Why do you need it in the first pasuk? So they say, no, remember, those are two different pasukim. One is talking about hatam tumat guf bekaret, hacha tumat basar belav. One is the imurim became, or the meat became tameh, and one is you became tameh and ate the meat. So those are two different things, and the punishment for them is different. So the fact that it appears in the second verse, which is all karet, if you eat it when you're tameh, it's going to include imurim. If you eat imurim when you're tameh, you're also obligated, even though normally you don't eat imurim. Yet if you eat them because they're sanctified, it's a problem. Likewise, it needs to teach you in the previous verse separately, because that's only an isur lo taseh. You just can't eat meat that became impure. You don't get karet for it. So therefore, we're going to say you need it in both verses. Amar Rabbi Avahu amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're back to this issue about isur hana'an, isur achila. Kol isurin shebatorah ein lokin alehem ela derech achilatan. When you have these things that are forbidden to eat, it's only if you eat them in the normal manner in which they're eaten. So lemiutemai, what does this come to exclude? Amar Shemi bar Ashi lemiute de'imachal chelev chai shepatur. If you ate raw chelev, nobody eats raw chelev. That's the fat that you're not allowed to eat. You would cook it, right? Who would eat raw fat? Who would eat fat anyway? But raw fat, all the more so not. So if you ate raw fat, then you would be exempt. Okay, you're not obligated unless you eat things in a normal way that they're eaten. If you eat in a way that nobody eats that way, then it's not. Some people say that what Rabbi Avahu said was a little bit different. Amar Rabbi Avahu amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol isurin shebatorah ein lokin alehem ela derech hana'atan. Only in the way that you would benefit from them. So lemiute mai, what does this come to exclude? Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, lemiute sheminiach chelev shel shor haniskal gabe makato shu patur. If you put fat from the shor haniskal, you take the chelev and you put it on a wound to cure the wound, right? Think about an ointment, it's oily, right? So they would use that for a wound. You're exempt because that's not a normal way that you benefit from chelev, okay? So the kol shekain, and all the more so, the first one that we saw, this would include if you ate chelev chai, shu patur. Itmar nami, now we're gonna have support for this second version. Amar Rav Acha bar Avya, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Hiniach chelev shel shor haniskal gabe makato patur. Okay, he says exactly what we just said. You'll be exempt. Why? Lefi shekol isurin shebatorah ein lokin alehem ela derech hana'atan. You're only going to be obligated if you eat things if you use things the way they're normally used, and this is not. Amar Rabbi Zera, af ananami tanina. Rabbi Zera is now going to prove, and most Mepharshim think he's proving the second version, although some people say maybe in general to both. Ein sofkina ta'arba'im mishum orla. Ela al yotzei min azeitim u'nanavim bilvad. You don't, sofkima arba'im means you don't get 40 lashes, even though it's really 39, but it says 40 in the Torah. You don't get 40 lashes from orla. Remember, that's for fruit, the first 3 years. If you eat the fruits, ela al, okay, now they're talking not about the fruits themselves. They're talking about juice from the fruits or things that come out of the fruits. So if you use olive oil and you eat it, or grape juice or wine that comes from the grapes, or that comes from the olives, then you're going to be obligated because that's the typical use, right? More people drink wine than eat grapes. Okay, more people drink olive oil than shemen zayit. That's the normal way you use them. But ilu mitutim te'enim v'rimonim. But strawberries, figs, and pomegranates, if you take the juice from them, you will not be obligated orla if you drink the juice from them. So what do you see here? This is proof that this isn't the normal way of using it. Okay, and therefore, here we have good proof. My time alav mishum delo ka'achilu derech hanatan, right? Isn't it because you're eating them not the normal way you benefit from them, right? Normally you eat strawberries straight. Most people don't eat strawberry juice. So Amar le Abaye, bishlama. So Abaye says, no, this doesn't prove anything. Why? Because this is some other issue. This has to do with particularly an orla issue. Why? Orla applies to the fruits. Orla doesn't apply to juice. And they're going to say that juice, here, I'll read inside, bishlama yashmi'inam pri gufa. If they were talking about eating the fruits in an atypical manner of eating the fruits, I would agree with you. But the juice that comes out is just liquids that come out of these fruits. It's nothing real. It's not the fruits themselves. It's just the liquids. That doesn't even count for anything. Orla only applies to the actual fruit itself. Okay, whereas again, the wine and the oil is significant, but other things are not. So thank you, Julie, for pointing out it's mulberries, not, I assume you're trying, right? It's not strawberries, but mulberries. So in any case, these are not generally used for their juice, and therefore, but this is a unique halacha to orla. You can't learn from here to anything else. Okay, last thing for today, we'll stop here. Amar Abaye, hakol modim b'kilei kerem shelo kin alehen afilu shelo kederech hanatan. The one exception to this rule is kilei kerem. What are kilei kerem? This is when you plant your crops right next to your vineyard within a certain space. You're not allowed, it's crossbreeding. You're not allowed to do this, but your lokin alehen afilu shelo kederech hanatan, even if you don't use them in the normal way that they're used. Why is that? My time on mishum de lo ktiv behu achila, because it doesn't say eating there. It doesn't say it's forbidden to eat. It's forbidden to plant them. Okay, it doesn't say it's forbidden to eat. So because of that, if there's no isur achila, then we don't say that you're exempt if you do it in a not typical way of eating or benefiting. Only if it says achila are you. Okay, we're going to stop here. And the reason is because now we're going to start a question, but that question quotes a very long source, which continues into tomorrow. We won't even get to why we're quoting it. So I figure we'll stop here and we'll pick up with the question on Abaye's comment here tomorrow. So have a good day. Happy Hanukkah, everybody.